So we are, can you see that? Does the slide now say who are Severn Trent Green Power?
Yes, correct.
Fantastic. Sorry about that, folks. So that's who we are. We are all about renewable energy. We're the UK's sort of largest combined food waste recycler and composting business. We work with around 40 local authorities in the UK and process about 20 to 25% of England's household food waste via this process, which we're going to talk about tonight, called anaerobic digestion. And from this, we generate renewable energy and we recycle garden waste back to land as well. So here are where our sites are. So we've got 8 anaerobic digestion facilities. We've also got some compost sites dotted around the place. And our head office is just here, just outside Chipping Norton in Oxfordshire. My role is sort of a contract managing role, really. So I look after most of the local authority contracts that we have. And the site that's closest to you all is the one here in Wallingford. Now that has quite a lot of local authority food waste going into it, including Reading, Bracknell Forest, Wokingham, Windsor and Maidenhead, South Oxford District Council and Vale of Whitehorse. All of their food waste goes into that plant. Anaerobic digestion has been around for a long, long time, but it's only been really used to process food waste in the UK in probably the last 20 years or so. We've been doing it for the last 12 years. Farmers have little mini versions on their farms to process animal manures and such like. And obviously the ones we have are great big industrial sized. So we take unwanted food that otherwise would back in the olden days, it would have gone into landfill. And we create a beautiful, digestate with this, a beautiful fertilizer. And we also convert it into electricity. So this is a little diagram here showing a lorry tipping, packaging being removed, maceration, digestion, and then the creation of renewable energy. And what we're going to do is just talk that through in a bit more detail. So the process. This is where it all starts. Now these are generic photographs that your bins may look a different color to this. But basically, if any local authority rolls out a food waste collection, they'll give the residents a curbside caddy bin to put out for the dustbin men, and also a little an internal kitchen caddy. And some people choose to use those little ones, some people don't. But here we've got somebody scraping their food waste into a bin. That will then go into a larger caddy on the curbside, and the dustbin men come along, put it in a lorry and bring it to one of our sites. Now this actually isn't the Wallingford site, but is a spectacular aerial shot of one of our sites, which is in Hertfordshire, but they all pretty much look the same. If you've driven down the A4074 at Wallingford, you've noticed these green tanks, you may have wondered what they are. So they do all kind of look the same. So when the lorries arrive, they drive onto a weighbridge where they weigh in. They also weigh out, and then from that, of course, we can record all of the data for billing, invoicing and data management purposes. Once the vehicle arrives, it tips the waste into a recessed bunker, and that's what this little vehicle here is doing. I think this is one of the Hertfordshire vehicles. And this is typically what household food looks like. You're probably not very surprised by that, because if you recycle your own food waste, then that's what kind of it looks like. Lots of little bags, 1 or 2 kilos each, all nicely presented. Now the bunker that it gets tipped into, this is what it looks like when it's empty. So this was a picture taken at one of our sites when it was being built. And you don't often get to see one empty, because obviously they're normally full of waste. But you can see here that there are 2 panels in the floor of the bunker. They're called walking floor panels. And those panels move backwards and forwards. And at the end of that bunker, this metal bar here, in this photograph, it's still being fitted. It's not complete. But once it is complete, it's actually an Archimedes screw. And the food waste is pushed into that. And the next slide kind of is a close-up of this in action. So this is obviously, the bunker is now full of food waste. Here's the screw at the back, and when the bunker is operating, the food waste is all being pushed towards this end, and that Archimedes screw is turning And as it turns, food waste is dropping into it. And then what it does is it travels up. So here's the bunker. The Archimedes screw is at this end, and there is an incline which comes up here and comes out here. You can just see it coming out. So the food waste travels up almost like a conveyor belt, really. And it drops from here down into this machine here. And this is a hammer mill. That's the generic term for it. This particular one is a Wackerbauer. That's the brand name. It's a German machine. And it's an incredibly efficient hammer mill. It depackages. So here is actually an illustration from the manufacturer's brochure, and here is a close-up of one of ours in action. You'll see it opens up rather like a clamshell, so that the food waste drops in, and it's called a hammer mill because of these hammers here. If I move on to the next slide, you can see them here. When the machine is not switched on, which this one is, it's not active, they all lay down. And you can see here there are different shapes. So here's one with 3 prongs, here's one with 2 prongs, and this one here is just a sort of circular. It's rather like a dog bone shape. So they're all lying flat. But when this machine is powered up, they turn around incredibly fast. So if you imagine, these are all these hammers now stuck out because they're rotating really, really fast, and they pulverize any material coming through. So these are other examples of just little illustrations I found online. Hammer mills are used for a variety of other material, not just food waste. So here it's a kind of rubbly material that's coming in, and these hammers are macerating that material. So with our food waste, as the food waste is going around, the hammers basically pulverize it. It rips apart any packaging, and it macerates the food down to less than 12 millimeters in particle size. On the inside, we have a sort of a screen that goes around, which has got little tiny holes in it, and the food waste drops down through that. We also add liquid. So as well as food waste coming into our plants, we have deliveries of liquid waste. This process requires quite a lot of liquid. And there are a lot of liquids on the market. For example, you know, if you have a cake factory and you're making strawberry cakes in the morning, and then you want to switch to make lemon cakes in the afternoon, you don't want your lemon cakes to have a hint of strawberry. So between the 2 batch processes, you'll flush all the pipe work with water to clean all the strawberry out. And all of that water has to go somewhere. Historically, manufacturers could discharge quite a lot just to the watercourse, and they're not allowed to anymore. They're very much more regulated than they used to be. And we are permitted to take that kind of material. We can bring in any kind of fats and oils and liquids that are destined for the human food chain. So oil is like rocket fuel for our anaerobic digestion process. So we can take oils and fats, you know, from food production, but we couldn't take oils from engine production. So everything has to be permitted for sort of human consumption. So that's a very brief explanation of the hammer mill. So we add liquid waste at this point as well. So we get macerated food, we pump some of the liquid food as well, and we create what we call a food soup from that, which we'll look at in a moment. All of the bags, so again, at this point, all the bags are spun out by centrifugal force, and they are sucked up another pipe. So all of any packaging comes up here and drops out here, essentially. And here's a kind of close-up of that packaging stream. You can see there's lots of different colors, red, blues, a little bit of green, according to what color packaging people have used or what color bags have come in. We also take a lot of commercial waste, so they can be in different bags as well. And that food soup looks like this. So this pipe here is at the back of the hammer mill, and the macerated food comes out here and goes into a gigantic holding tank. And this photograph on the left was taken looking down this little tube here. So we take the lid off here and somebody took a photograph. So it looks like mushed up porridge, really. But it's a very valuable porridge, because this porridge is what we create electricity from. So it's your food waste that has been depackaged, macerated, and liquefied to make it so that we can pump it. If we didn't add water, we wouldn't be able to pump it around so easily around the site. So this is what we create our electricity with. And the holding tank that it goes into, this photograph is just kind of for reference, really. This concrete circle here is the size of that holding tank. And these are sort of very, very long stirrers that go right down into that tank to keep that food soup from being stirred. And these are our digesters. So this holding tank is kept full throughout the day, and the purpose of the holding tank is so that the site is not manned 24 hours a day. Our staff go home at 5 o'clock, but the digestion process is a 24-hour process. So every 4 hours, we feed a batch of this food soup to our digesters. And this is what they look like. So there are 5 of them on site, and they kind of mimic the human stomach, if you like. Each one has got sampling points where we can take samples of the biology of all 5 of the tanks. And this is the aerial shot of our North London site. So the vehicles come in here. This is where they tip the food, and then they drive back out and come out here. And these are the 5 tanks. Now, every 4 hours, we feed just 2 of the tanks. We only ever feed the 2 tanks here. When we start with a new site, obviously all 5 tanks are empty. So we fill these, and then when they get full, they begin to pump to the next one and the next one. So we don't have a full tank and then digest it and then empty it and then fill up the next one. All 5 tanks are in use all of the time. And you can see here it then passes to the next 2. So going back to the tanks, these are concrete bases, so they're cast in situ, big thick concrete walls. Then we have insulation around it and cladding to keep the warmth in. Each tank holds roughly 5,800 cubic meters of that food soup. And each tank is very gently kept stirred to keep the food soup moving. And what happens, this is a 90-day process. From the day it goes out to tank 1, the food begins to break down. So rather like in our own tummies, the food waste starts to break down and it gives off gas. And we capture that gas in the roofs of the tank here. And these bouncy castle roofs are actually gas storage chambers. So we're carrying on collecting gas all the way through. As you can see, we feed the first 2 tanks, then the soup passes to tanks 3 and 4. After tank 4, the food soup is pumped back into the reception building, and we have got 3 pasteurization tanks there. The whole site has to operate within the animal byproducts regulations. So back in 2001, we had a foot and mouth outbreak, which was a huge disaster for the agricultural community. And after that, a whole load of regulations came into being to try to prevent that happening again. Because we treat food waste, we have to make sure that when we spread our food waste to land, we're not going to cause another foot and mouth outbreak or another environmental catastrophe. So there are various measures that we have to adhere to on the site. So things like when a vehicle has tipped, they have to pull forward in that reception building, and the whole building is built on a very slight incline. To the center of the building, liquid from both sides runs to a central drain. So drivers pull ahead of the central drain, and they have to wash their wheels and disinfect their tires before they leave the building, so that they're not taking anything out onto the roads. If I go to the site for a visit and I walk through the reception building, I have to use a foot dip to exit. We already talked about food waste being macerated to 12 millimeters. That is prescribed by the animal byproducts regulations. And these tanks here have to be pasteurized to 70 degrees for 1 hour. They use recycled heat from our engines. So our engines are working 24 hours a day, and just like any engine, they get really hot. So we use as much of that heat on site as we can. So these 3 tanks, which are in operation 24/7, are heated by using excess heat from the gas engines, as are all the 5 of these tanks here. So after the pasteurization, the fertilizer is then ends up in tank number 5. And once it's got to tank number 5, it is then allowed to be spread to land. Up until that point, if we had some sort of failure and we were unable to pasteurize, we wouldn't be able to spread it to land. While we're looking at this aerial view, it's also, I'll just point out this thing over here. So this is a biofilter. So these sites, if ever you've been to one of our sites, they don't really smell. So a lot of waste sites have a very high odor signature, but actually these sites are relatively odor free, but all of the odor is kind of contained within this building. So when you go into this building, oh yes, there's a smell. But to make life a bit more pleasant, we have the whole building is kept under a negative air pressure. So when the doors are open, so these roller shutter doors are kept shut. They open for a vehicle to enter and then they close fairly quickly. And when they do open, the air is kind of sucked in rather than being pushed out. So it's kept under negative pressure. And the air is being extracted into this big concrete chamber, which is actually full of wood chip. And the air is pumped out into the wood chip. And in doing so, when it's released back to the air, the wood chip eats all of the odor from the air, and then when it vents back, it doesn't really create any sort of problem, and it keeps the reception building as nice as we can make it. There is always going to be an odor. It is what it is. It's 100 tons or so of food waste that's breaking down, but that's what that is. So we've already talked about those. So yes, so now we've got the digestate is now in tank number 5. So now it's ready for its journey to land. So this is what the fertilizer looks like. It's rather like baby bio, but on a massive industrial scale. Here is a bucket of it. And you can see over here, this is our North London plant. There's a lorry parked here, and there's a little little sort of offlet. Here we go. Here's another shot of it here. So the tankers arrive and they fill up. I think this one on the right is actually at Wallingford. Each tanker holds about 20 tons. And these vehicles then drive off to wherever the fertilizer is being spread. And generally the farmers will have a tank on the side of the field, known as a nurse tank. And quite often we'll have 1 or 2 vehicles doing a kind of round robin. They'll go to the site, load up, come to the field and keep this tank full. And then we bring a contractor in. And what they do is then spread it. So this spreader now has been filled with fertilizer, and it drives up and down the field, and all of these little green tubes, as this vehicle drives along, the digestate, the fertilizer is spread. And this one, I think, is a 30-meter boom. So it drives up and down, spreading fertilizer. So it's a very efficient way of spreading. It doesn't spray it in the air, it keeps it very close to the ground. Farmers tend to want fertilizers at 2 times in the year. They want it in just after the harvest, and they want it in the spring. You can spray this stuff onto growing canopies if you so wish, and you can apply it, after a harvest as well. So here's another one. And this photograph here, I actually took myself way back in about 2011. And we just opened our very first anaerobic digestion plant in Cassington in Oxfordshire. It's on the other side of town to Wallingford. And we'd just done our first application into a local field. And so I took a camera down because it was a really good visual. In this particular field, we weren't able to spread right to the corners because there was a stream. So we left a gap. So it was a great visual of, you know, without fertilizer and with fertilizer. And I think we've seen that photograph already. So the farmers really got on board with this. I mean, in Oxfordshire, I'm not sure if any of the local farmers had used a digestate before. You know, for years and years we've produced compost, so this was kind of new when we started doing it. But I know that they very quickly were keen to try it and then keen to use it again, because it has readily available nitrogen. When you spread a compost to land, there is a lockup effect with the nitrogen. It doesn't actually get released for almost a year. Whereas with the liquid digestate, the nitrogen gets to work the minute you've spread it. So the farmers are very keen. Farmers will always still want compost. Compost is great for breaking up very depleted fields, for giving structure back to the earth. And this liquid fertilizer is just great for a great nutrient boost. And it's also a great thing to be doing with your food waste. And so on the flip side of the coin is your food waste has been returned to land, where it can grow more food. And these are the engines that create the electricity. So we saw in an earlier slide all those bouncy castle roofs. They're all interconnected so that we get a nice homogeneous blend of gas from all of them. And the gas is then, the methane element of the gas is injected into these engines. So it's purified and dewatered. Any water molecules are removed, any sulfur is removed. So it's nice pure methane. And we've got two engines side by side in casings. Now all our sites are slightly different in that the size. So the Wallingford site is a 2.4 megawatt site. So it's creating 2.4 megawatts of electricity on an ongoing basis. And that part of the process carries on 24/7. So we make sure that storage tank, that what we saw, the buffer tank, is full enough when the site operatives go home at night, that it can continue to feed every 4 hours through the night, so that we can carry on producing electricity. So 2.4 megawatts is enough power to power roughly 4,800 average sized homes all the time, which is pretty good going out of your food waste. So our two Oxfordshire plants are 2.1 megawatts and 2.4, and then some of our later plants are up to 3 megawatts, which is enough to power 6,000 homes. And that's a close-up. So this is a photograph taken with one of those casings open at the side, and you can see the engine inside. Now, I'm not an engineer, but it's the way we convert electricity from methane. It's sort of the same analogy of filling your car up with fuel, really. You turn the ignition, the engine jumps to life, and it does the suck, squeeze, bang, blow thing. And then there is an alternator. So we create a kinetic energy. And instead of creating a movement energy by driving off the forecourt with our engines, we then convert that kinetic energy into an electrical charge and create renewable energy. And then we export that to the national grid. We have no control over where it goes. It just goes to the grid. And obviously we get an income from that. And this is what makes this process different to composting, because mostly with our other plants, we have a product that leaves the site for which there's very little revenue. Yes, we get paid for our compost. Yes, we get paid for our digestate, but it doesn't kind of wash its face. What makes anaerobic digestion very interesting is this second income that we have, which is the income we get from our electrical generation. What it does is it allows us to offer our customers, including local authorities, a really good gate fee. So it may, because we have this secondary income. So it's really interesting. And that's kind of it, really. I mean, so these are the two products we create, but I think what is really interesting about this process is because now in Oxfordshire, you know, all the residual waste goes into an energy recovery facility, and there's been a lot of talk about, well, what does it really matter then? Why should we still recycle our food? Because if it goes into the residual bin, it goes to an ERF and it gets incinerated and they produce electricity. So what's the difference? But this fertilizer is what the difference is. If you put food waste into your residual bin and it goes to a big ERF and it's incinerated, yes, you get this part, but you don't get this part. And what this process does is retains all of the nutrients from your food. And that all goes back to land to create a fertilizer. So it's all this closed loop recycling that we hear, you know, so much about nowadays. Anyway, that's it in a nutshell. But if anyone's got any questions, then I'd love to hear them.